So let us know when you. Hi there all. So yeah, thank you for joining us this morning. Just wait a few seconds. We've just started the session and people are just piling in, as it were. So just bear with us about 10-20 seconds and then we'll get going. Okay, great. So we can see people coming through nicely now. So what we'll be doing is just to start off with, thank you very much for joining us for today's session, where we're going to be focused around a topic that's got certainly, many parts that we could get into in terms of how we do it, but around maximising the Microsoft investments. Certainly this is something where we found very commonly, both for many years, but also ever more so in recent years, the aspect around how we get best value from the investments we make, as well as then ensuring that we can give good justification of where we want to make investments and how we kind of manage in today's climate of the kind of constant change in how technology moves and hence how we support our teams respectively in maintaining those skills and being able to, make good use of the technologies as well as the distribution of reason. Then this becomes a topic that is really something that adds a lot of value quite commonly to the kind of customers and the organizations that we've been working with. And so certainly what we wanted to do today is that we do like to keep these sessions relatively informal and also certainly guided by yourselves. So, and with the kind of the breadth of the conversation, we're going to be keeping this reasonably high level. But we will look to get into some of the details and really talk to some of the principles of approach that really aim to try and give you a good understanding of how you can either apply this or where you may have questions that help you kind of personalize this to your own selves. So with that said, we'll very quickly introduce ourselves. So I should go first, given I'm doing the talking. So if we just jump to the next slide, Ken. So Phil Mercer, I'm the CEO at PowerOn. It's certainly fair to say that I do quite a few different bits and pieces, and over my time, kind of had a number of different kind of aspects I've done. And so for my sins relevant to this kind of context or role, I used to be very much a depth licensing expert. So have kind of worked with many different organizations across the globe, both from small, medium and very large, in terms of helping them think around how their licensing aspects also connect with their technology aspects, being a combination of both that kind of license commercial, but also having a strong profile in working with the actual technology adoption, technology deployment side. So from my side, be helping to input into sharing experiences of where this kind of process has been applied, and certainly hope to add some value to the conversations we go through. Ken?
Yes, good morning all. So I'm Ken Caban. I head up the digital transformation side of things. So I'm a solutions consultant heading up customers just understanding and transforming their digital technology. For all my sins, I've actually gone through some of this transformational change back in my life in Australia through a $400 million application assessment, all the way through digital transformation. So I think throughout my career over the last 20 years, I've led, been part of, and certainly worked through a number of these things. So Phil and I are quite happy to share our experiences on this. I think you'll find it quite interesting.
Good. So with that said, today's topics, we're kind of talking around very much a conversation that kind of has a lot of depth that you can go into, but ultimately it also kind of comes into areas where the approach at the high level really makes a very strong difference to how you can get the results that you're aiming to get. And so what we're going to look into do to cover today is talking around where those opportunities for cost avoidance and cost savings can come from, and how a process can be applied to not have to overcomplicate how to get to a good view and a good shape of what that looks like for you. So mapping these to things like your existing Microsoft licensing investments or potential investments you look to kind of make, as well as kind of really how to effectively think around prioritizing those really for that maximum impact, and talk through a bit of the methodology that we've applied. And I say started doing this over 15 years ago, and certainly matured the different aspects around how that works to help think about ways to get this to effectively be implemented within your organization for assessing and prioritizing budget against those IT roadmaps. As we go through, we do want to tailor this to you. So Kenny, if you go to the next slide, what we'd ask is, although we don't have a formal Q&A time slot in this, we want to kind of encourage that if you have questions or you want us to provide clarifications to points made, as we will be talking generally speaking at a high level, then it'd be great for you just to drop those kind of questions into the Q&A boxes. We will be monitoring that as we go through, and we'll look to also add those kind of clarifications or updates or direct answers as we kind of go through the session. But with that said, and without further ado, we'll kind of get into the content.
Great. So just to set some context here, what we want to do is just give you some thoughts and ideas around why this is probably quite an important topic right now. So just to set the scene, just want to cover off some of the challenges of the rising apps that's literally hitting our industry at the moment. So people like myself that have worked through the traditional infrastructure days where we used to build servers and put applications and publish those out, that shift, we've all seen it in the last decade, to SaaS, PaaS and IaaS is really bedding in now. But that's not just for the end user, it is also for IT, tools, tool sets. We're seeing even firewall apps, etc., have web interfaces, etc. So it's driving massive user flexibility, capability across the organization, right? And SaaS is literally becoming norm in the IT services area. So that prevalence of IT in those fields is really driving some challenges. So that traditional concept of that firewall network AD is really being extended and challenged as we have users in the working from home, developers in different countries working together, etc. So that drive to protect the user, that drive to protect the device, the app, and the data anywhere and everywhere is really becoming a challenge. So what are we doing for that? Obviously, we're really purchasing more tools, trying to get an understanding of what we can do. How can we stop threats on our end users' laptops when they're working from home, but not on the VPN, etc. So those challenges are really being driven. And I think it's really interesting because these things are now being captured in a lot of analysis. So what you're seeing over there in the diagram, there is the Flexera's 2023 ITAM results. You can see that in all fields that there is a very high percentage of software that's either being underutilized or wasted, meaning they're not even being used. It's literally a third, but it's not just the desktop software. You can see in our data center, in our SaaS side of things, as well as the IaaS and PaaS. Now, I used to be a sysadmin in my younger life, and I remember buying products for all their features and feature sets, but 80% of the time only using 20% of the functionality. So with the growth of apps and tools, this is becoming even more prevalent now in the modern age.
Yeah, I think I would add to that as well, in the context that I think it's probably fair to say, and certainly feel free to drop in the Q&A if anyone disagrees, that with the way that both the combination of, let's say, Microsoft for a second, in the context that Microsoft bundles everything, so it's very common for us to end up with suites of licensing, which gives us access to lots of elements that we might not necessarily considered. That same prevalence is across other kind of technologies. There was certainly also kind of a quick sway that happened when early stages of the pandemic side, where there was rapid change and hence rapid investment shifts. And so organizations also found themselves in a point of reacting to that element in respect of it. So, as I've put in the comments, yes, it's very much a bundling effect, has quite a demonstrable element to where licensing under use comes from. And I think this also becomes then an interesting question, both from a point of view of where purchases are being made to respond to a point event, and then where purchases have been made for larger vendor commitments, where there is contained software or contained elements that kind of fit within it. And so this adds an interesting dynamic to us all in terms of how we then kind of consolidate, or how we kind of think about where areas of choice come in. And I think, certainly from our side in respect to this, it's saying that, we're not going to come at this from saying Microsoft's the answer, what's the question? But it does come down as a business context in terms of where's the right balance of the tooling, the technology, the kind of the current skills and the understandings, and then how we kind of build those into a forward view of simplifying our architecture, simplifying our cost side, and consideration around how we manage skills and investments moving forward. So where do opportunities present themselves, and how do they really stack up for us? And that's some of the parts we kind of talk through.
Yeah, that's a good lead in, because that is the reason why you need to look at consolidating that vendor stack, because there is a number of benefits, and it is not always a technical thing. So speaking as a techie, there's a preference or prevalence towards maybe a product or a technology, but is it the best business sense? Does it help the bottom line? What about the complexity of different application sets working together, the integration of those? So maintenance, upgrades. So there's a lot of challenges that need to be considered, not just the technical or the functionality of it, right? So having that consolidation, you want to look at it from at a higher perspective to see where it is it sits, and that essential strategy for optimizing your IT and operations and resources, drive that efficiency, right? Helps basically the organization, react quicker, consolidate, reduce the app portfolio. I remember going through in a previous role where we consolidated from 2,000 applications and tool sets down to about 400. And we found that of those 2,000 application sets, that nearly a quarter of them were actually integration sets, meaning they were put in to make applications talk to other applications. We were data sharing, basically. So taking data off one system to report into another system. So it's always strategically important to do this, regardless of whether it's Microsoft or SAP or whatever. But in this context, we're obviously looking around the Microsoft 365 stack. So there is some things to realize and understand. And I think going through conversations with a lot of customers, it is almost a feel like that there has been a bundled purchase, from a top level down, and a lot of the organizations' technical elements are not familiar with what they have. So the big question asked is there to everyone is, are you actually using what you've paid for? Are you aware of what you're getting? This is actually a great opportunity, this type of workshops and assessments, is to understand what you've purchased with your licensing or you plan to purchase, what those products are, and what capabilities, what opportunities they provide. And I think one of the other things that a lot of people forget and don't really factor into their plans is buying the license doesn't deploy the product. We come across this day in, day out where, oh yeah, we've purchased Microsoft 365, we've rolled out Teams, we've rolled out SharePoint, we've done Exchange, that's it, right? Then everything else is sort of like, oh, well, we didn't budget for the deployment of that. We didn't know about Defender or the effort. Oh, what about data compliance, etc. And so thought that was all just done automatically. No, you need to understand that there's an element of license purchase, but then there's two other columns, and that's people and process. So you need to train up the people to roll out that technology. You need to develop your processes, end user processes, standard operating procedures. So as you roll some of these things out, there is a cost aligned internally to deploying that. So let's let's map this into how we approach this. So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you Poweron's approach to how we do this mapping. So let's just start with that high-level framework first.
Yeah. So I think it's fair to say there's a number of kind of things, because this slide just represents kind of a high-level structural approach. Go I'll say there's a lot that goes into contextual sides behind the scenes, and I'll try not to to over go into detail, which is my own foible. But essentially, I think there's a couple of key principles to kind of take into account. So although we are a Microsoft partner, I always kind of tend to make the statement of things like, Microsoft's, what's the question, before we kind of give an answer. So it's not Microsoft the answer, what's the question side of things. It's normally way of framing that. Now, interestingly, this comes back into more of a, what does that really mean? It kind of represents a general sentiment that we have to be aware of the way that different vendors engage, as well as, of course, way different partners engage, and how that really represents to mutual alignment of goals. So what I mean by that is bundling is one thing, and it's fair to say that for the last 20 years of doing this side of things around licensing and stuff, there's been a very common profile of selling the dream of look at everything that's possible, without necessarily always the true reality of what it takes to achieve that possibility. And so it kind of comes back into this idea of like, well, everything's a bundle. But I think one of the parts to say is commonly when was doing a lot of this services and do this services with customers, there's this assumption that you must buy everything as a bundle. But that isn't actually necessarily true. So, there's many times where saved customer organizations a lot of money by actually being able to reduce their licensing commitments whilst being able to achieve the delivery of more while still getting the necessary components that they wanted. But it always is an interesting part around how you start from a position of authority or a position of strength within respect of how you can negotiate with the respective parts. And it's not necessarily then getting too caught up in the possibility and really focusing very much around, what I would tend to sometimes say, and it is how do we kind of really drive, what's the most probable outcome that we can achieve, and hence what's the best balance of that. Now, with that being said, whenever you engage with kind of licensing purchases, and especially where there are bundles, there is going to be an answer that you get to, which is technically and operationally the right answer. So what I mean by that is these are the technologies that realistically we want, realistically we need, and also realistically we can support. And so that'll give you a profile of what you really want to be looking to make your licensing investments in. But with the way that the nature of the commercial structure works, there will be the ability that actually it may make commercial sense to cover those priorities to actually buy more. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that actually you've still though focused it from a conversation where this is what we really need. If it doesn't sit within this need, then unless it's cheaper to buy it in a different way, then we don't want it, right? To kind of put it in a fairly simplistic term. And this is where it kind of gives you then a better position of strength to kind of negotiate, to position, to kind of go through what actually makes sense. So there is an aspect here where actually we're talking about a combination of both bringing the technical know-how, licensing kind of awareness, as well as then kind of asset management or really kind of current state understanding of what you have and what you've invested into, and looking then to kind of look to balance those in terms of how we get ourselves into an informed position to be able to kind of push back in terms of what makes sense, how we make use of that, and how we kind of go through that as well. So as you can probably imagine, there are a number of parts that could go into that, but like anything, it's how much is the effort versus the return. And so, if you're an organization that's, looking at this from a point of view of either you've already made your licensing commitment, then the focus should be around how we kind of see about leveraging it. But if you're in a position where you're either coming up to a large renewal point or kind of commercial intersection point with Microsoft, or you're looking at maybe net new agreements or potentially significant uplifts, then this is also a very good time to do it, to again put yourselves into a position of what is realistic and what is a priority for you to make use. So you'll see within this, there's kind of like 5 stages within the aspects of the approach, but the final 2 really center around that point that if you are coming up to a potential investment point or a potential significant uplift decision. And then the actual precursor activities will benefit you from a point of view of being in a strong position to understand what you really need, and hence then not get drawn too far into the sell process, shall we say, of the selling the dream of what's possible, and you can keep it on a strong tact of what is realistic for us to do. You know, because to reinforce Ken's point, I've seen it very many times over the years where there's been the investment made, but without necessarily having the structural kind of additional investment to help IT to make those investments realized. And that can come from many places, both like where the sales process from Microsoft and others have engaged conversations into the business, where it's kind of been led more from a licensed commercial conversation rather than a technical implementation and execution conversation. So there is aspects here where you want to draw those different parts of your teams together around your licensing procurement, your asset management side, and your technical to really kind of balance those things out. So there is certainly an aspect of collaboration here that will be key to enabling this, but it's certainly something that can add significant benefit to it in regards to both what you expend out on your licensing and how much of the bundles or other components you buy into that you can make use of realistically in respect to it. So, you know, with this, Microsoft's a broad, just going back a step, Ken, please, sorry. With this, Microsoft is a broad kind of set. And so I'm not going to steal too much of the thunder from the conversational points we're going to go through. But really, you don't have to over-engineer it. There's many ways that you could approach it. But one of the best ways that we found over the years to do it is to really focus on it from a point of view of mapping capabilities to license components. And so you start by a point of bringing together both what are the priorities for the organization. That will be, yes, I'm sure there'll be combinations of priorities for, say, cost reduction, but there'll also be, of course, priorities around ensuring a certain level of quality of service and ensuring security metrics and maintaining and working within the skills and the capabilities that are both present and can be developed within the team, the resources that you have available to you. So just establishing those kind of criteria at the top around the business priorities, and then kind of working through actually then just go literally taking the Microsoft stack, and we'll explain a little bit in a second around how to do that. But essentially then that's kind of looking to give yourself that informed position of what's available, what's possible, and how does that kind of start to align relevant to it. And then you go through that stage of then saying, right, let's align that. Let's think about how this maps to our forward plan, our forward intent, and our priorities to give yourself then a list of potential opportunities with how they stack up from a criteria side. And from that is then really balancing around, there's lots of stuff you likely will be able to do, but what's realistic for you to do in terms of your capacity, how those need to be timelined in, what other priorities and other aspects you're working on as well. So this then kind of comes back into a prioritization side. And as I say, those activities done either just in general after a licensing commitment, perfectly reasonable to do it, but it'll be more then led by what you own rather than what's possible. Or if it's done precursor, it can be done on what is possibly up for a licensing commitment conversation as well. But it's to keep it simple in terms of structuring it. Typically, the best way is around what's the product capability alignment to license components, mapping those then into against your priorities around how that kind of stacks up from the different areas of effect, and then looking to prioritize those against what will it take to actually deliver this, and you know the relevant support and components given, so that you can then map and say, well, actually, out of all the 20 things that are possible, these 8 are the ones that realistically we're going to be able to achieve in the next 2-3 years in respect to that. But yeah, Ken, if you want to kind of jump to the next slide. So as we kind of go into that, then essentially, you know, it is going through that initial assessment of the existing tools and systems. So, you know, I mentioned there are the part around mapping it against the product and the product capabilities. So, you know, what you do want to do, and I did say as well, that it's that combination of both technology, asset, and licensing. It's very much a good starting point to look to have effectively a structured list of here are all the functional capabilities which you can map against the Microsoft product items. And then typically speaking, what you do is then actually an aspect of, well, a couple of parts you want to kind of fill through, and we'll kind of show you some examples of how this can be populated in a relatively simplistic manner. But essentially, it's around identifying where you currently have licensed services or tool sets or apps today. So this could be Microsoft components you've got. It could be very likely to be other components that you've got in place as well. So getting that feedback from your asset team and the teams around, so what are we doing currently for our VPN? What are we currently doing for our kind of content filtering? What are we currently doing for X, Y, and Z? And it kind of gives you a view of kind of what you've got, where say a license or a commercial renewal point is, and what your kind of current expenditure profile is against those side of things. So there's a bit of audit due diligence data to pull together, but it helps give you an informed position of what you're likely to do in respect of that. And it's kind of thinking then around how you make good use of those different kind of services in regards. You then really want to kind of, sorry, go on, Ken.
I was going to say, just to reiterate that there's a prevalence there. This is standard, TOGAF type enterprise architecture stuff, but it's not. We don't need to make it that complicated. When you're looking at evaluating those apps, just ask the question: when was the last time we evaluated them? When was the last time we looked at this? There's a lot of, shall we say, perceptions that IT teams make. And hold on to those perceptions over the years around products and technologies. Oh, I really like this product 10 years ago. Well, 10 years later, is it still the best product out there? Oh, this was useless 5 years ago. Well, is it still? So utilize things like Magic Quadrants, utilize industry best practices out there, because that environment is changing so much. When you're assessing your existing tools, it shouldn't be just on, gut feel and perception, right? You need to look at those capabilities. You need to check if it is still what you think it is, right? And also, don't just look at the technical aspect. There's got to be that, how easy is it going to be to use, right? What's the impact to our end users? Is this cost effective, right? And also, especially on the bundle topics like Phil mentioned, is there functionality overlap? Am I buying something to use one feature and it's throwing in 15 other features that I already have, right? So this is a very common thing to find. But let's just show you what we use, and we don't overcomplicate this. Now, this is a fantastic little website called m365maps.com. Highly recommend it. One of the great things about this is that it's got pretty much all the Microsoft 365 licenses, or Microsoft Office 365 license suites, and it helps you visualize them. But the great thing is you can literally click on each one of these boxes and it'll take you straight to the technical article. It'll tell you what it is. So this is Microsoft 365 E3. And the big question there would be to ask yourselves or your teams, are we aware of all these things? Are we utilizing them? Have we even assessed if we need them or want them? Does it make part of our plans? So we don't really overcomplicate this, but we, certainly spend a couple of hours going through making sure we understand these sets with customers. So highly recommend that you go through this. So the first thing in this stage is to make sure that whether you're going to purchase E3, E5, A1, is to make sure you understand what you get in it. And if you already have purchased it, start going through and saying, are we utilizing it? Does it help meet a business need? Does it help fill in a gap in our tool set, in our requirements? There's a number of elements in these suites that can really align and make the lives easier as well. So
yeah, but just kind of added into that as well, like this is a really useful piece. There's a gentleman called Aaron Dinage that pulled it together, but it's the really nice thing here as well, literally just it provides a breakdown of the different functional capabilities that are present within the different licensing bundles and how they align to how the licensing structure breaks down. Because a lot of times we just think there's E3 and E5, but you can technically buy most components individually. You can buy them as then layers of group SKUs. But it's also to say, well, literally just turn this into a list, and then you have capabilities that you can then go in and assess, as Ken's talking about, aligning both from, is it a need for you today? What do you currently potentially use? And this gives you a nice simple way of then structuring, mapping what it is and how that kind of starts to work with you yourselves in respect of it. I would say there's going to be stuff in here where it's got capabilities like so you'll typically find that there's a large list. Actually, then there's going to be stuff in here like things like Exchange Lockbox or different parts that's very scenario specific and typically industry specific, where it may just be a very simple part to write off. But then you'll find that there's probably a good 50% of items where they actually have kind of good applicable areas, but aren't necessarily fully aware. And I think it's just also going to be important to say as well that, you're not alone in that. It's going to sound bad when I say it, but you're going to ask most Microsoft people what's included in the licenses. They won't be able to fully tell you. So this is something that just really is useful to help, show through that level of detail that's there.
One last bit on this slide is be familiar with CALs. So client access licenses. I know a lot of organizations that are still paying for CALs that are actually included in their bundle stack. So get familiar with what you do and you don't get with the CALs. Now let's move on forward. I'm aware of time kind of thing. So once you've understood it, you need that alignment. So your line to fit is where you start rationalizing those tool sets. So we're going to show you how we do it. Phil's given away some of it already, but in general, this is where you're literally just trying to identify things, right? Identify overlapping tools, identify older things that are redundant, right? So you're looking at function analysis. You're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, best practices, industry toolings out there, gaps in tool sets. So a lot of business or IT requirements. Is there any of the tool sets within the Microsoft 365 stack that could help fill some of those gaps? Do we have features that we're not utilizing, right? And is there anything that's missing? So you'll understand you'll probably have that, and that might be driven by business requirements. Cyber Essentials Plus is a common one in the healthcare sector, right? To reach that. So there's those type of capabilities that you can look for. And there's some capabilities within the M365 stack definitely to help with that. And then the next stage, obviously, is to standardize and streamline your processes. I think this is one that's often missed, but it's also quite a big one because it's not just deploying the tool, is it? It's rolling out the tool that's the challenge. So if it makes the end user's life easier, if it makes it faster, if it improves IT efficiency, the organization is improving. So let's show you quickly how we do this align to fit, right? And so what you're seeing here is sort of like a mapping. So on the left-hand side, we've got our product bundle set. Now we're just showing you an example over here. And then we've broken those down to those functional capabilities that are within that bundle or product set, okay? Now, is this product a good strategic fit? So does it make good sense business-wise? Is it a good functional fit? Will it work nicely IT-wise? What's the effort to implement? And I think this is where partners like ourselves come in and shine. With our years of experience in these areas, we can give you a realistic effort to implement. We're seeing how other organizations similar size to yourselves are doing it, how long it's taking them, what are their challenges, how are they going about implementing it. We can certainly share that knowledge. And then the next bit is that alignment to, duplication, similar functionality. Do we have an existing tool that potentially does this already? when does that tool's end of life, right? And how much are we paying for that tool? So what you're literally doing is trying to identify at this stage at a high level, functionality, whether you've got gaps, whether it's being utilized in your organization or not, right? And getting a timeline of when those products or assets come to an end. So this is now starting to help you identify and align your Microsoft 365 stack. So we do this for pretty much all the products. Okay, so the next stage of this is to start thinking about prioritizing these. As Phil said. So now there's a number of elements with prioritizing these that we just break these into sort of like nice and easy to go, short term. So these could be critical gaps, security concerns, compliance needs, right? So for us, those obviously come first, and outside of those, anything that we see as low effort and high fit, we think it's a quick win. So if it's fairly quick to implement, why wouldn't you do it? The medium term stuff will be more aligned to business and IT requirements, and these things might have an end user implication and might have a change to a device or an update or a process change, right? But we know that it's going to drive value and efficiency. So the other things that we normally factor into the medium term is where we want to consolidate tool sets. So this is not necessarily saying, as Phil said earlier, Microsoft's the answer, what is the question, but more of, okay, we think Microsoft has an equivalent product. Let's just take a bit of time to proof of concept it, trial it out, just test it and compare it to our existing tool set. Does it meet our needs, right? So that's more of a medium term type of strategy. So you don't want to basically go, oh yeah, we'll put our eggs into one basket and then we'll move it all from one basket to another basket. What you're doing is basically, putting some analysis work 6 months, 12 months before you look at changing tool sets. And for the long-term approach, this is where you want to fine-tune. These are more of the challenging steps, the automation, the embedded processes, and more of the complex tool sets that are going to have big change. So think of things like automation, the back end based on sensitive data and automatic activities and reporting, right? So those type of things, first you want to deploy it, then you want to implement your processes, then you want to standardize those processes. The final thing is there's to get into automate as you see repetitive activities. So how do we do that at PowerOn? We visualize that. So leading on from that spreadsheet, we start mapping these. So on the vertical is our time, risk, and effort to implement something. The longer it takes, the more time, the more cost it's going to be. And then across the horizontal is the business and IT value, the impact, the win for the organization. So we start mapping the tool sets into this. So not going to go through all of this, but you get a fairly good idea of basically, is it a financial benefit? What's the business impact? How much time is required to do this, right? Is there an organizational risk to doing this? Is there a technical risk? And of course, the one that everyone seems to forget, is there some investment that's required? Right? Now, at this stage, you're almost ready to make a plan, but in some scenarios, we find that for some of the bigger things, especially where investment is required, you might need to make a business case for it. So again, what we do is for those critical areas where there is large change and large maybe deployment costs or challenges, right? We've developed some value calculators. So our value calculators are primarily based on not just tangible benefit, but also intangible benefit. So what you're seeing over here is an end user compute value calculator showing the the value of going to something like Intune, right? So this factors in things like the time it would take to say, build an image. How much time would we save on that? How much time would we save if we had a fully automated process of that? So our IT saves time, the end user saves time. Well, what about things like autopilot? If the device was shipped direct to the end user and there was no IT intervention, what if we were able to rebuild machines in less than an hour? How long would you spend support time on a problem before you actually just hit the reset button on Windows, right? And if you're a public sector organization, right, is there even VAT savings if you outsource some of this work? So there's a number of elements that we factor in to show value. This helps drive the business case if you're looking to make that large license commitment or make the business case for a large investment. And then the final piece of that, once we've mapped it out, shown the value, etc., is taking those priorities and putting it into a plan. So at our plan stage, it is literally agreeing with the team and going, okay, in what order do we do the tasks? What are the ones, as Phil said, not these 20 things, but what are the 8 key things around these areas? Now, I've done this many times with technical teams, for customers, for my own team, etc. And I'm a big believer in sharing the plan. So from senior management, presenting it to your C-level, saying, this is our Microsoft 365 investment, and this is our plan to deploy it. Right? At the lower level, with the technical teams, this is our Microsoft 365 investment, and this is our plan to deploy it. The message is the same, right? But when you go to Joe, the mail administrator, or Bob, the networks guy, and you get him to work on task X or task Y, they see where their project or their task sits in the grand scheme of things. Everyone buys into this, right? Every 3 months or every 6 months, you just revise the plan. How are we going? You know, is it on track? Do we move some arrows? Do we extend some things? Have we done things on time? But this gives a great visualization, a 10,000-foot view for everyone. These obviously are sub-projects and can be broken down into a number of other areas. But from this perspective, when you go back, you've got an actual plan that says, right, we've bought M365 E3, or we're planning to buy E5. Here's our plan for deploying it. And these are the components that we plan to use. So, in summary, okay, the investment you make in your Microsoft 365 products, you know, there needs to be a plan for consuming that, right? So think about that current position you're at. You should be trying to do this ideally before you buy or renew your licenses. Make sure you budget for that deployment, that rollout, and phasing out some of the older tool sets, right? Consider the effort to train your staff, right? When you're assessing existing tool sets, right, it's a good opportunity to just order apps, tool sets in general. Shadow IT is a big one, right? There are plenty of products out there, and there's some products within the Microsoft stack that can help you identify shadow IT. For those of you familiar with it, Cloud App Security is a fantastic product to give you an idea which some of that. Look for gaps, look for overlapping functionality, right? And look for where you can drive efficiency benefits. And then prioritize that, map that adoption plan and activity. I think this is very, very powerful visually, right? And make sure you communicate that across the business.
I'd say as well that many experiences from going through that activity is that typically you'll find that you can be able to gain additional investment support for developing your teams or gain assistance in terms of how you work through that, whilst actually reducing your overall spend profile. So it is very much one of those services where it is one of those types of processes which you can go through that does genuinely look to free income from your existing spend profile to be able to then reinvest back into the team to make better use of the components and the investments that you've made and support your team in terms of how you move that forwards. But yeah, really help summarize it, as Ken said. I think as well to say that we've obviously covered things at a high level today, but there is going to be common trends that we found. So what we've certainly thought to do is then have a number of sessions that you and your team can join, where what we'll do is we'll talk through like the common higher likelihood items that present strong value, where we can give you a bit more technical context, technical details on that. So we've got a number of sessions kind of coming up over the next 2 months, which we welcome you to join and attend. They'll be very much kind of tech and know-how sides. They get a little bit more into the detail and talk around the different capabilities that are most common to present good opportunity for yourselves to take advantage of in the respective kind of workloads as well. So certainly watch out for those emails. They'll kind of be coming through to you, but we welcome you to join those sessions as well as they kind of come up.
I think just to wrap that up, we've shown you the high level, and I think just to reiterate, those are free sessions that we do with customers, and those that are in more of the architecture roles, more of the senior management roles, looking at it. You're welcome to book a session, a couple of hours with Power On. We can start that spreadsheet kind of thing, but we'll get you aligned to it. So these are perfect if you're into that, assessment, making those decisions. But if you're interested in doing some of those strategic workshops with people like myself, free to contact us or drop us a line.
Absolutely. So it's just left to say thank you obviously very much for your time. We certainly appreciate you kind of joining us today. It's always good to be able to share kind of the knowledge and opportunities, but equally as well, there's as you can appreciate, we've kind of covered what is a fairly subject that you can go right into the depth of the weeds with, but hopefully we've shared with you some kind of thoughts and principles to think to that will kind of support your own journey in terms of how you continue to drive that through. But we do welcome questions, following on from this. If there's something that kind of comes to mind, then do feel free to reach out to the team. We're more than happy to kind of provide insight or kind of help answer questions that might be helping it make it more relevant to your good self. And as Ken said, you would like to have a bit more of a tailored session where one of us actually helps walk that through with you. I'm more than happy to do that. But thank you for joining us today. We will share out the recording as well, and we hope you found the time useful. Thanks very much.
Thank you all for joining.